Welcome everyone to CHIRLA TV, the immigrant voice. I'm your host Edgar Aguilar, and I'm joined with Pedro Trujillo here from a safe distance. We're keeping, more than 6 feet distance at the moment. Pues bueno, sí, hemos estado bastante ocupados apoyando a nuestra comunidad en distintos esfuerzos, pero estamos aquí de regreso filmando un episodio más de CHIRLA TV, y esta vez estamos teniendo de invitada especial a una persona que pues ya básicamente es una regular aquí en el show. Es la mismísima Angelica Salas, directora ejecutiva de CHIRLA. Hola, ¿qué tal, Angélica?
Hola, ¿cómo estás, Edgar? Un placer, Pedro, estar aquí desde nuestras casitas.
Y nosotros aquí desde Cantón Studios estamos saludándote, ¿verdad? Y muy felices también de regresar otra vez. Hemos tenido también un largo descanso. We had a long break, right? Well, not really break, still working hard to support the community in these trying times, and which is the reason why we're even here, right, Edgar?
Yeah, like you mentioned, Pedro, we've been extremely busy, and I know CHIRLA themselves have been extremely busy as well. I know that since the pandemic started, CHIRLA has not stopped advocating, has not stopped having volunteers reach out to the community and continue the advocacy efforts for our immigrant community. Could you chat with us a little bit more, Angelica, about what CHIRLA has been doing, especially with the I Am California campaign that you were running?
Well, first of all, what we did right away, as soon as we heard that there was the stay-at-home orders across the state of California, and also in Los Angeles County, is our entire organization started working from home. And we adapted to actually provide the services from virtually. In some instances, still in person, but very much following all the protocols and the guidelines issued by our health officials. And so what we did was figured out how we were going to continue to do the organizing, the community education and outreach, continue to keep our hotline open, continue to provide legal services, and also not to stop the work of really engaging our community civically, because this is an election year. It's 2020, and a very important year for two things, to get out the vote, but also for the census. And so we said to ourselves that we weren't going to stop, that we were going to get creative, really use technology in as much as we could, also get trained in technology so that we can offer the services to our community. During COVID, what is very apparent is that the inequities and the lack of equality that our community has before COVID, it has just been made worse during this pandemic. And so what has happened is so many of our community has been visited by two horrible pandemics. One is a health pandemic, the other one's an economic pandemic, and I would actually posit with that a third pandemic, which is about racism and inequality. And so what many people were asked to work from home. But what happens if you don't work? We can't work from home because you actually work as a cook in a restaurant or as a waitress in a restaurant. What happens if you're a farm worker and actually your work is out in the fields? Or if in order for us to be able to continue to have food on our table, you have to keep grocery stores open, and you are a grocery clerk. Well, that meant that for many of our community, staying at home was not an option. They had to continue to work in order for us to survive. But then there was a lot of our community that also got economically devastated, and that for especially the undocumented, there was no access to any level of economic relief connected to their inability to be at work, because everything was shut down. So what we have seen during this time is great pain and suffering in our community. We received thousands upon thousands of calls. And what we noticed too was that if we didn't raise our voice, the immigrant community was going to be left out of access to healthcare, access to the safety net, and access to economic relief. And that is why we launched the Yo Soy California campaign, I Am California campaign, which basically says include immigrants in all the things that are needed in order to survive this pandemic. Don't ignore the fact that immigrant communities are part of California, that the undocumented are essential workers, and that during this time, they should be cared for and supported, not cast away and not ignored, and not pretend that their pain and suffering is any different than anybody else's.
And so what does, Yo Soy California, who does this land on?
Well, there's two things. The messages are to the federal government because during the response from the federal government through a program called CARES Act, a law that passed that actually provided assistance to individuals. Immigrants were completely left out, undocumented immigrants especially. But what was worse was that US citizens and green card holders who were married to undocumented individuals and their kids were also left out. So this message goes to the federal government that says immigrants need to be included. Our families need to be cared for during this time. These are taxpayers, and every taxpayer should have gotten stimulus relief. It is unconscionable that you have whole communities across this country that aren't included. But we're also asking at the federal level that there be full access to health care, irrespective of legal status, and that we make sure that during this time, we recognize that it's time to include individuals fully into our community by formally recognizing them through legalization. And in fact, at the federal level, our work led to the passage of the HEROES Act, which actually does include immigrants, that does protect essential workers, even legalizes a portion of the undocumented community. And that only happened because of our pressuring, because of our tenacity. This campaign also goes to the state level. And at the state level, our push is that for the undocumented, they have full access to unemployment benefits, or what we call wage replacement. These are the only workers that if they're not working, they have no access to any kind of wage replacement, any kind of care. So our pressure was so intense that at the state level, Governor Newsom began with his first step, and he recognized it to be insufficient, but what he created was a disaster relief assistance program for immigrants. And so it provided $75 million from the state government to give out to 150,000 individuals throughout the state of California, $500 and up to $1,000 per family. And I'm very happy to say that CHIRLA helped 38,500 people at the end of this program make sure that they access the little assistance that did exist. And I just really want to make sure everybody who's listening understands that $75 million sounds like a lot, but when you have 2.5 million undocumented individuals living in California and only 150,000 can be helped, that's only 6% of the population. It's just not enough. So the Yo Soy California campaign continues to fight for access to the safety net, and we're in the process of trying to win a food assistance program that would provide all low-income families, but would also include the undocumented, that they would be able to have access to $300 per month for 6 months, or up to $600 in a household for food assistance and food vouchers, so that our community that's actually providing food on our tables doesn't go hungry in their own home.
Can you just briefly talk a little bit about how when people have an understanding of CHIRLA, where they think CHIRLA is, they'll probably think that it's going to be a massive organization that has the ability, almost like a bank, to be able to redistribute these funds. Can you talk just briefly about the process of making sure these 38,500 families had their applications processed?
Well, CHIRLA was part of a statewide team of 12 organizations that actually were picked to distribute these funds. And so CHIRLA was responsible for Los Angeles and Orange County in terms of this distribution. These two counties have the largest population of undocumented immigrants of any counties in the country. Right away, we knew that we were going to be bombarded by individuals who were in need, whole families that were in need. But I don't think we expected just the incredible clamor by our community, so that in the first couple of days, we had millions of people calling to try to seek this aid that was only available for 150,000 individuals. But then we're in the middle of COVID, and this is what's so important for everybody to understand. CHIRLA is very accustomed to large numbers of people, whether it's for services or in terms of serving individuals through advocacy and mobilization. So we know how to handle crowds. But it's very different when you cannot connect one-on-one with individuals. So most of the services had to be done over the phone. And what we realized during this time is, one, that in order to get to as many people as quickly as possible, because the program is only open for a couple of weeks, it was important for us to quickly get through those conversations. But here you are talking to people with a lot of difficulties who really want to be heard. They need the assistance, and yet you're asked to talk to them in, 10 or 15 minutes, move to the next one. But because, there's so many more thousands of people who are in need. So it really, I think, tested the organization about how do you service our community with care and humanity, and also do it at mass scale in order to provide those services. And it has been a stretch for the organization, to the point that at one point we said, you know what, everybody drop what they're doing. Everybody has to help on the disaster relief program in order to ensure that as many people get their resources as quickly as possible. And we're still doing that because we believe that people are not helped, our policies are not won until people actually get the benefit of those policies.
I know that CHIRLA has had a huge impact when it comes to reaching out to the community, to communities that are not very well aware with the census. They don't really participate. What is it that CHIRLA is doing right now because of the pandemic?
Well, first of all, what has happened is that in 2020, our federal government has failed us. And instead of being a partner to get as many people counted, they've actually put obstacles for our community in terms of being counted. And this has been by cutting down the budget, stopping the census from continuing, I would say, beyond September 30th, which was actually because of the pandemic. There was a decision to elongate the timeline for the census, because obviously it's hard to get people to fill out their census if you can't actually talk to them. Especially one-on-one, which is usually the process. So what has had to happen is that community-based organizations and local governments have really had to step up and do a lot of the work that would otherwise have been done by the federal government. So todas las personas que nos están escuchando, que no han llenado el censo, les pido con todo, ¿verdad? Con todo a nuestro corazón, que por favor llenen el censo. El censo nos da acceso a recursos para nuestras escuelas, nuestros hospitales, asegura que nuestras carreteras y nuestros edificios de infraestructura, todo que haya recursos para poder pagar por estas cosas. Entonces, es tan necesario que si usted no ha llenado el censo, por favor lo haga. Lo puede hacer hasta por teléfono. Y es tan importante que cada uno de nosotros seamos contados para asegurar que haya recursos para nuestra comunidad. And so it's important. In 2020 is the census. And so we are, as CHIRLA, going to all our immigrant community and also to our Spanish-speaking community to make sure that they fill out the census.
And so if you'd like to support these efforts to make sure that everyone gets counted, follow us, CHIRLA, on social media, on Instagram or Facebook. We have a couple of pledges there, commitment cards that you can fill out to make sure that you get counted and you're committing your community to get counted as well. And while we're still talking about high stakes here, there's still a high need because of the pandemic, right? Although people are going out, a lot of people are going back to work. And here's where we need to discuss a little bit about the high stakes of here in our state of California, where our state government can do something about the disparity, right? That people who were in poverty, living paycheck to paycheck, they were just completely exposed by this pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about just briefly about the hashtag Choose Us campaign?
Well, right now, what CHIRLA is doing is part of a campaign to pass Proposition 15, which is schools and communities first. So it's a proposition to ensure that the revenue that we generate actually gets reinvested into our communities, and that instead of choosing corporations and multimillionaires or billionaires, that we actually choose the people, choose the communities that need the revenue the most. So Proposition 15, what it does is it actually targets a small percentage actually of corporations that are not paying their fair share in taxes, in property taxes. This does not go to residential. It does not go to small businesses. It's to large corporations that for years and years have shielded their properties from properly paying their property taxes. Well, those property taxes are the resources, the revenue that is needed for schools and for local governments. So what has happened is if you shield these corporations from actually paying their fair share of their property taxes, that means that many of our schools, especially in low-income neighborhoods, have been underinvested. And so what we're saying is choose our community, choose us, vote for Proposition 15. This is something that's going to help, especially the Latino community. And so we need us to go out and vote and to continue to choose a future for our kids, quality education, access to clinics, governments that actually have the resources to support the very things that we need.
How is CHIRLA preparing, and what is CHIRLA going to be doing now? You know, I know CHIRLA right now is dealing with pandemic in our communities. We're looking to these propositions to put them in the ballot, and then the election. So it's nonstop for CHIRLA, but what can we expect from you guys?
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you to all the young people who are doing so much. They're taking their demands to the streets, but they're also going to be taking them to the polls. They're going to be voting for people who actually, really respond to their bold demands. I think that this generation of young people, as I would say, generations of past young, the youth of past youth are always very sophisticated, who really, seek to push for what they believe is ideal, not just for settling. So I think that that's what young people bring to the table. They just still have a great vision for what is possible, and they operate from that place. And so I think that's why it's so important that any movement very holistically include immigrant youth. But I also believe that it has to be multi-generational, young people and individuals all across the age spectrum participating. And that's what I really love about CHIRLA, which is full leadership by youth, but also full leadership by our adult members and sometimes some of our more senior members who have been in the fight for a very long time. And I think that's what brings in power, sort of really tapping into that source of knowledge and that also source of vision. But then I would also say this year, 2020 is a year in which the stakes are high. And we say that every year because every year it's true, but the context changes. And the context right now for immigrant communities under this administration is horrific. What's happening in this country is unacceptable. It is something that is going to be reviewed back in our history as one of the darkest moments of this country's history in terms of the actions of the administration towards asylum seekers, towards working men and women. And so we have to take action. We cannot continue another 4 years. And so what we are doing is working on the C3 side, working in our California elections, and then with our sister organization, the CHIRLA Action Fund and the Immigrant Power Pack, is really moving our action to get elected individuals who actually are supporting us, supporting our agenda, who believe in a pro-immigrant agenda, And so we are asking everybody to support this cause. And how can you do it? Well, you can do it by becoming a member of CHIRLA. You've heard of all the different things that we're doing, whether it's fighting for immigrants and full immigrant inclusion in the safety net and economic relief and healthcare, or making sure that we're counted in the census, or getting out to vote. Well, you can support us by becoming a member. Membership supports both the CHIRLA programs, social service programs, but it also supports the CHIRLA Action Fund campaigns, the civic engagement campaigns. It's so important. And we are so proud to be an organization of immigrants, for immigrants, led by immigrants, but also it's important for us that we be supported.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you so much for your time. So if those of you watching us are interested in supporting this noble cause, interested in jumping in, it's such a timely moment, right? Then we invite you to go to chirla.org/join us, www.chirla.org/join us, so that you can join the fight. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Edgar and Pedro. It's always a pleasure.
Claro que sí, Angélica, muchas gracias por ser parte del equipo aquí con nosotros. Pedro, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Y ya lo saben, familia, salgan a votar, salgan a hacerse contar en el censo, pero involúcrense, sean parte del movimiento, porque sin ustedes, we don't know what we could do.
Sí, háganse miembros de CHIRLA, pueden hacerlo de cualquier parte de este país. Respalden una organización que lucha por ustedes.